Welcome to our Back to Church webinar. And we'll dig in here in just a minute, but we're still waiting on a few people to join. So while we're waiting on people to join, go into the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. And also say what your favorite Dolly Parton song is, since we're, we're walking through her passing. So give us a sense of where you're from and your favorite Dolly Parton song. David, I know you're joining us from Reno, Nevada, and tell me what your favorite Dolly Parton song is.
Yeah, coming to you from Reno. If you haven't watched any news, we've had some forest fires in the news this week. So that's been kind of sad to see the hills burn, but I know God will replenish those trees and, well, sagebrush, I guess. That's probably what mostly burned. But anyway, thanks for joining us. Favorite song from Dolly Parton? I don't know. She's got so many. And as I think through how I grew up listening to her, I grew up in kind of the 80s. And so she was obviously very popular. But I liked Coat of Many Colors because I think that brings you back to some humble roots. So I'd probably have to go with that or Jolene. I thought that was kind of a good one too.
Well, David, I know this isn't one of your favorites, but I know that for me, I remember the movie 9 to 5 pretty well, and so there was always something about that conversation. So anyway, and I can see right away we've got several people saying 9 to 5. Jolene, I will always love you. Yep. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of good
And
choices out
that
there.
I Will Always Love You, is that a better Whitney rendition or Dolly rendition?
Now we're going to get into theology and ecclesiology with that conversation, David. But so we're going to save that one for another day.
I like it.
Um,
Way to
but
backpedal.
so thanks for joining us. As we said already, we're going to really dig into a conversation about what it looks like as you guys are welcoming people back to church. You're starting your new ministry year. How to assess, engage, and retain and grow your people. As we go along, if you've got questions, please either put them into the chat where you guys have been putting in the songs, or feel free to uh, put them into the Q&A, and we'll engage with those as we go. But we'll also have some time at the end for that. And so, excited for you guys to be here, David. If you want to show our pretty pictures that are on the next slide there for everybody.
Yeah, of course.
So
There we
I'm
are.
Dwayne and I'll be the host, but I'm joined today by David. And if you've never had a chance to meet David, you are in for a treat today. David is the co-founder and CEO of Mortarstone. And David, I'll let you introduce yourselves, but just I've had the chance to get to know David for over many years, both as a customer when I was an executive pastor at a church here in the Austin area, but over the last 3 years of being able to walk beside him as we've really worked to serve the church and serve you, the people joining us today. So anyway, David, introduce yourself and go a little bit deeper than what I just did.
Sure. And let me first brag on my brother Dwayne, because as he mentioned, he was an executive pastor at a large multi-site church in Austin, Texas. And so when they were a customer and a coaching client, we got to walk out a lot of the things that we get to talk about daily now at Mortarstones. And so I just wanted to sing his praises as a faithful uh, Christian leader in the church, as well as helping us lead now the capital C church at Mortarstone. So I very much appreciate his friendship and his leadership. Um, so thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you.
Yeah, about me. So Mortarstone is kind of my brainchild, if you will. My pastor tapped me as a lay leader during a capital campaign that we were trying to do to help gather some money for acquiring a property. And so both my business partner, Craig, who handles the support side of the house, he and I started this company some 12, 14 years ago now, probably 14, close, almost 15 years ago.
Yep.
And just have had a wonderful ride of being able to impact churches with insights and strategy on generosity. My background is a little unique, and you're going to hear that in today's presentation, as I've never been on staff at a church. I'm a lay leader, for lack of a better word. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the guy that you want to connect with, if I could be so bold. So as somebody who grew up in a church, I would say I'm well discipled in the area of generosity. And I've probably done fairly well as it relates to being a steward. So I've lived within my means, if that makes sense. And as a byproduct, I'm able to support the things that I care about. So that's a bit about me and Mortar Stone. And so just thankful for the time to be able to connect with you guys as customers, as prospects, as people who want to dig deeper. I want to link arms and do that with you. So that's my heart, and that's our desire at the company as well.
Awesome. So David, go ahead and advance to the next slide. And let me just say, as we go through this today, you're going to get the David and Dwayne two different perspectives in this conversation. So David, as he just talked about, will approach it as a lay leader. I will approach it very much more as a guy who sat in the seat and was on staff at a church. And so I think it will be an absolutely incredible time. I know for me, the years that I sat in as an XP, just every year we tried to think through, okay, we're going to now have people who are coming back to our doors, who will come to our doors for the first time, because as you guys know, people often, they start making new commitments and they re-enter commitments that they've had when school starts. And so I know in my personal church, which I'm an elder at, we saw significant growth in our numbers because people now all of a sudden started coming back to church, but also started a journey with church. And so, David, talk us through just real quickly, where are we going in this conversation today?
Yeah, I think at least from what I see and hear, this is arguably we're moving into one of the busier seasons of church, where people, families, staff, it's like the sprint to finish well. And so as we think about obviously coming back to school, that's also coming back to more normal schedules or rhythms. Vacations come to an end, at least for a season. And so then what do we want to be doing as practitioners, as church leaders? How are we, for lack of a better word, identifying the people that we need to be pastoring and mentoring? And so as we think about this, I thought through this webinar is how do we kind of create an on-ramp of sorts to finish strong? And that really is a reflection or going back to some of the things that we should be doing that maybe we got away from doing because of vacations, time off, sabbaticals for some of our leaders, all that sort of stuff. So how do we really start to lean back into what the data is telling us, just as what Dwayne just mentioned about kind of what he sees as an elder in his church. And how do we do that the right way, for lack of a better word? How do we view it as more than a gift or a transaction? How do we start that journey with people? And so that's really what we want to lean into with you all today.
Awesome.
I'll take this one. Everyone, I have the easy button from Staples, that little red button. Sometimes I push it and that was easy.
Like this one, David?
Yeah, like this one. As we think through the value proposition, where do we sit and how do we help you? And I know lots of you guys are probably proficient in spreadsheets. Some of our larger churches have database administrators who are also proficient in, say, Microsoft BI or Tableau. And we kind of segue in there to whereas we want to be that easy button for you. And so as we think about Mortarstone from a value proposition standpoint, we bring literally hundreds of different metrics, key performance metrics around people and dollars. And I would just say that's an opinionated framework. In other words, as we kind of lean into advances in technology, and we'll get there in a little bit with our discussion on AI, but as we lean into that, how do we start to assess our data? And that's what the value proposition is with Mortarstone is let's create the framework so that we can easily assess and engage people. And so the framework leads to some workflows, which should lead to accountability and that sort of thing. And so as we would summarize that, we just want to be your easy button. We want to help month-end reporting be more seamless. We want to say weekly activity should be more seamless, taking the load off the back office, if you will, that sort of thing. And so that's our goal. And if there's things that we can obviously do better, we want to hear from you for refinement and improvements.
And David, back on that slide, to me, the opinionated piece is always a key one that you use that word quite a bit. And every time I do it, I have to translate it to say the fact that we've actually spent a lot of time thinking about the what and the why behind the data. And so that's where the opinion comes from. And so that's one of the powerful things about that I see about Mortarstone from when I was a customer until now, as well as the fact of we've got people who think all day about this and about how we can actually help churches take steps in discipling their people. So I just wanted to add one more flavor on the opinionated piece.
Yeah, and I'll dig in a little bit more because I think as you guys become more inquisitive about data, we largely follow what we call as the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP. They have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of reports and key performance metrics to assess the health of nonprofits. And when you think about our industry, again, zooming out, we fall into a segment of philanthropy, which is, I want to say, close to $600 billion of giving annually to nonprofits, of which about a third of that, little less than, goes to religious causes, which is our segment. And so, and this is something I don't often get a chance to talk about, but if you think about the last 3 or 4 decades of giving, philanthropy to ministry causes, religious causes, used to by far and away outpace any other cause. It was largely 55-60% of total philanthropy went to religious causes. Today, it's just over 30% or right around that number. And so there's been a constant erosion of people giving to religious causes for 40 plus years now. And so I think that's something that I wrestle with, and that's something that we will start to work towards in this webinar as it relates to this is the trend. And when I say a trend, it's not a blip on the radar. This is 4 decades of deterioration of generosity to the religious causes. So I want you to be aware of that. And again, we can go out and research that. We have tons of material on that, but our framework should help you maintain and grow at least at a pace faster than maybe what you were used to.
Awesome. So David, let's jump in and really Proverbs 20:27 actually says a key piece is the fact of be sure you know the condition of your flocks and giving careful attention to your herds. And that's really a lot of the heartbeat of what we're going to be talking about today. This is not a conversation about fundraising. This is a conversation about faith raising, shepherding and discipling your people. And so as we walk through this, please recognize that's the context for this conversation. And so David, let's jump in because I know people want to hear some practical pieces, and I think we've got a lot of that today.
Yep. So each of these 4 slices, in other words, how do you look at your data? Each of these 4 slices, we can go a mile deep because they require their own unique strategy. For example, you don't look at new givers or communicate with them the same way that you would, say, a 75-year-old who has been at your church for the last 20 years. I say that to say the average church should have 10 or more users within Mortarstone with different permissions. In other words, You don't want to grant giving information to a lot of people. It's like letting the genie out of the bottle, right? And so, but we also don't want to backlog or restrict the flow of strategy, or at least who are we connecting with, because of you know, pinch workflows or issues. And so as you think about who's using Mortarstone, you probably need to expand that list by 4 or 5 times to get an appropriate number of people that should be looking at data, or at least looking at lists of people with specific strategies to engage them. So that's the easy button, if you will. Let us identify, organize, and create accountability for you so that we can really take the burden off the back office and accelerate how we use data to connect and disciple.
Good. Because I think the interesting thing when I think about that funnel, David, is unlike a funnel where I'm pouring in oil or something like that using a funnel, all these funnels have off ramps. This funnel has off ramps. A new giver can choose to go in, or they can take off. And what we really want to help you with is, how do you make that funnel so it's a continuous conversation, not one that has a ton of off ramps in it? And so I think as we go forward, that's going to be a key part of this dialogue.
Yeah, and I'm going to hammer on you guys about knowing your metrics, and one of those, as Dwayne just alluded to, would be your churn. Um, is your churn too high? And if you don't know what your churn is, I would strongly encourage you to look at it. If you're a multi-site church, look at it across multiple campuses. So that's something that, as Dwayne alluded to, we do not want to be leaking or having a leaky bucket. So whatever we can do to shore that up, that's really what we want to focus on. The summaries report. So whenever I will engage with a church, which is probably 4 or 5 times a week at minimum, I always go to the summaries report right out of the gate, because it gives me that 30,000-foot perspective of how are we doing at acquiring people and dollars. And so the summaries report quickly organizes the snapshot of your total giving as well as the various segments. And if you scroll down, you can quickly see giving and households by demographic markers as well. But this view allows me to quickly assess a lot of things without too many clicks or a deeper dive. And of course, I do and I will go deeper with a lot of this, specifically around the nav bar with different strategies. First, total giving. Is it growing as much or faster than the number of givers that we have, and why is that? And in this particular case, as you look at this church, yeah, you're up 2.5% in total givers, but 18% in giving. And if you go to that lower right quadrant, you're largely going to see where that largest increase came from, which is a massive increase in that top giver giving. And so there again, that's something to be aware of. If you're acquiring, example, new church or new givers, but you're not acquiring giving at the same pace, what does that say about your systems and processes around that on-ramp?
And David, if anyone's not familiar with this report, if you're in your Mortarstone account, you can go under Insights and then look for summaries report, and you can get right to this report.
Yeah, there's just so many churches struggle with how they look at new givers. And it's like, as long as attendance is up and giving is up, they think they're okay, but they miss the more granular pieces of this. And like, for instance, in this top right quadrant, yes, the church grew new givers by 2%, which is really not, it's not something to be proud of at that point. But more importantly, look at the average or the giving per capita with household. It actually declined. And so is that problematic? Maybe, maybe not, but it's something to be aware of, right? And so that's just what we want to lean into with data. And so again, as you think through KPMs, or what are the things that are on your dashboard, Mostly it's attendance, it's baptisms, it's total giving, but rarely will we get into the granularity of how we make up that giving. And that's my word of encouragement to you on this slide. Continuation of the slide would be just understanding some of the demographic pieces of your church. So as you scroll down on that same page, you'll see a number of different reports that we surface on age. And so why is that important? Well, we think the vast majority of churches, this is the uh-oh that leads to the aha moment when you start to understand things about your demographics. You know who you are attracting, and more importantly, how you are getting funded, which then leads to strategy for developing or engaging and discipling on this unique group. Um, Older givers, and when I say older, I'm speaking specifically to my age group, that 50 plus group, if you will. This group, by and large, will be much less than half of your total givers, but typically it makes up a vast majority of your total giving. And so it will help you answer the question, who are we attracting? The demographic pieces. How are we aging out as a congregation? Are we age dependent? All those kind of key things will start to layer around the demographic segment of your church. Last, you see in that unknown section, that top bucket, if you have a large unknown segment of your constituency, of your database, we can append that for a small cost. We can append that and help you fill in some of those gaps with your contact information. That would be age, that would be contact information, addresses, email addresses, that sort of thing. We can append that for you. Like I said, that's very reasonable, but then it gives you a better perspective of who you're attracting at the church.
And
Wayne,
David,
anything to add?
I think the probably thing I would say there is that unknown, as we get into talking about, and next month we'll be talking about end of year giving strategies and the communication strategy, having a big bogey like this church has, where 648 is unknown, it really makes it difficult for you to be able to actually isolate down and determine your communication strategy. And so we'll talk more about that next month, but a way to get ahead is to actually do what David said, and you can reach out to support@mortarstone.com to get more information on that.
Yeah, we can do a sample run, a sample test, kind of share with you what that looks like.
Yep.
Goals and process review. This is where churches struggle that I see, that I engage with. They create a process, but they don't set a goal or assess to see if it's effective. So when you think about your example, a first-time giver strategy, so many churches now are starting to adopt strategies to thank people. Some of them have the handwritten thank you note. If you're not using our email system, I would strongly encourage you to do that. Again, it's the easy button. It's seamless. It's what we call a personal bulk email strategy. And so you can send a personal note to 1 or 100 of your people at the same time. And that strategy allows them to respond in a personal way back to you so you can start a dialogue. So that's really, really important that I want to share with that. It's different than going through marketing. It's different than going through a mass communication strategy. This gets it more on a personal level so that you can talk about the assimilation or the engagement process of the church.
And David, I think when I look at this, as I think through this piece of the conversation about, you said we talk here about getting new givers growing at greater than 2%. The other thing, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about this as well, is setting a goal towards what percentage of your new givers do you want to become consistent and ongoing givers. Becomes, a lot of churches that I look at, we're talking 20% of their people, first-time givers, become ongoing givers. How do you increase that up to a healthier number than that? Because that's a lot of people walking through the conversation.
Yeah, specifically, Dwayne, I think you're starting to lean into this cohort table. And if you guys have not looked at this lately or benchmark or establish some goals using this table, I would strongly encourage you to do that. Growing attendance is obviously important, but growing givers is how you fund ministry. And retention of that is key. Remember, as Dwayne was talking about that funnel, the off ramps, for lack of a better word, or the leakage, if you will, retention is really key. So it's not always about the second or third gift. Rather, if I could shift that focus to say, what about the person that didn't give a subsequent gift? That should be the focus. Do we want people to giving first time, second time, third time? Do we want to recognize them? Unequivocally, yes. But really, if we had to lean into a strategy, it's about those that are not making that next step. And that becomes the priority from a resource standpoint, from a people standpoint. And then let the technology handle what it can do best is thank them, encourage them, and move them on that journey. And so in this case, look at April 2026. Out of all the first time givers, that subsequent month, they only kept 31% and then 19%. Fast forward 4 months, 85% of those first time givers haven't given a second gift or a subsequent gift. So therein lies the opportunity, the problem and the opportunity.
And David, I think one, if you're not familiar with this, it's under Insights, New Givers, and by cohort. And it's probably one of the pages that I actually wish when I was an XP I'd spent more time on, David, to be honest, because I don't think I spent a ton of time on this at all. And when I talk to churches now, I'm looking for the trends of, like I've seen churches where every October the retention rate is higher than any other month. And I had a conversation with them and like, well, that's the month that we do our tithes challenge. I'm like, okay, so you're inviting people into a new pattern, so you can look for some of those things as well. But the part that I love about this is you can see the movement in the conversation. You can look at this by percentage or dollars, and so there's a lot of insight you can get from this simple table to help you build a strategy.
Yeah, that's a good point. People are dollars because I was talking with the church specifically just last week, and I noticed a uptick in their growth in giving from first time givers. And it was like it happened like 6 months ago. And I asked, well, what happened here? Just like you said, hey, we did a tithing challenge. Well, in this particular case, there was a church that imploded and they attracted a bunch of new attenders that were already givers, faithful givers. And as a result, that cohort table spiked during that time frame.
And I've seen that often as well, David. That's another core example of what's there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Churn, again, we talk about that. It's a silent disruptor. Of course, our desire is to see people grow to tithers, but let's be fair, that just hasn't been a reality since we started tracking giving or philanthropy, multiple decades ago. I think the average person, at least according to the IRS, gives roughly 2.5% or less to charitable causes. And so as we think about not only that journey for first time givers, but there should be a strategy for all of our givers from first time, low level, infrequent, all that sort of stuff should be a documented process with automated strategies to help you effectively manage that. Something that I often tell churches, it's great to thank them, but it's probably even better to educate them. And so we've developed lots of tools for our churches. For example, there's a 6-week email campaign that should go out to first time givers. And it's really about what we want for you, not from you. As a new giver to the church, it can reiterate vision, it can reiterate kind of the discipleship pieces, but you should be thinking through a journey that you're educating your people on versus just a quote unquote thank you note.
And David, I'm putting the link to that in the chat. So if anyone wants to go download that, it's a great resource and something that we're giving you guys for free. And you can use this as much as you want from that standpoint. But I think there's just a lot of the power of building out a journey for people is incredible because we all have journeys that we take people on from it. If you're a first time guest, you typically have a journey that you're trying to get them to take. And so all that is part of that conversation, helping them take their next step.
Yeah. And that's Again, the goal here is to grow generous disciples, not just to make a transaction out of it. So,
Yep. So, David, before you
from
jump into this,
mhm.
Debbie asked a question. What are the best practices to gather age? So, back to the conversation about ability to append. Are you asking for birth date or just birth year, month, year, and where do you get it? So, can you give a little bit more time or a little bit more detail around that?
Yeah, there's lots of strategies. Again, the easy button, which is not always the cheap option, would be letting us append it for you. But if you wanted a more organic strategy, you could just send out an email to everyone that you don't have age information on and say, we'd like to celebrate you on your birthday, or we'd like to better understand who we're talking to. And so you can have them self-identify and send you information back as well. That's never a bad idea. Um, but if you want to kind of fast track that, then there's things that we can do within Mortarstone to help you accelerate that too.
And David, when we do it inside Mortarstone, we're getting the month and the year. We don't get the birth date, so we get month and year, and it's from readily available resources from a. We use a data broker who actually collects publicly available information, and so that's where it's
Yeah.
coming from.
Yeah, we pin data on wealth markers, which is kind of an advancement strategy. Many of our larger churches who have stewardship pastors will embrace that. But we use a company called Axiom. They're a Fortune 500 company. And as Dwayne said, there's very strict privacy policies when we do that. And we don't send any of that out unless you're aware of it. But those are all things that just fast track helping you better understand who's in your database.
Yep.
Let's talk about core givers, because if you think about our opinionated framework, new givers, top of the funnel, core givers, that's we commonly refer to as bands 2, 3, and 4. And I like to think of them as your best friends. The importance of core givers cannot be overstated. They are, most importantly, the more tenured than your new givers. In other words, new givers are your most transient segment in your database. They're not grounded, and so there's an important strategy. But when you think about core givers, these are your best friends. They are there to serve. They're there leading small groups. Um, as you pastors have needs, they are quick to raise their hands to fill that gap. And so when you think about them, they're serving or they're in community from a generosity perspective. This is where we need to engage them to grow to top givers. And so as you think about that feeder system, the core givers is where you should be graduating people with not only desire to give, but capacity to give. And as we start to identify that, what are those next steps that we can help them take to grow in that segment of their faith? Our community explorer map does a ton of free stuff that you can glean as it relates to median income, household value as far as real estate value, lots of information that we pull in from third-party sources, mostly census block information that is actually reported to the IRS. So it's very accurate as well. It's not accurate to a household level, but it's pretty accurate to a census block, which gives you great understanding of opportunities to take maybe a band 3 or band 4 giver and grow them up to a band 5 giver or top giver.
Yep.
Retention, key here. You got to know your retention. It should be north of 75%. Churn, you have to understand your level of churn. And then, of course, graduating them. At minimum, you should have 10% growth in that top giver category from your core givers. And so that is really where I want to land that conversation is how do we start to think about our core givers with a journey in mind?
And David, last month, Kent and I did a lunch and learn where we talked about who are your potential next top givers. And so there's a
Mhm.
lot of, you can use, as David said, a lot of the information we have to start identifying people who you should have discipling and next step conversations with. And check out our lunch and learn on our webinar page if you want more information. But a lot of great information there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Again, retention, churn, graduated. That's kind of the mindset you want to be thinking through. And again, know your churn. I would love everyone to raise their hand and say, I know my churn. I know it church wide. I know it within the various segments. There's a ton of data and reports in Mortarstone, but this is probably something that I would encourage you to lean into, is to better understand what's going out the back door, who's upgrading, who's downgrading, and then what are our processes and systems to be more efficient at that. This particular slide, if you think about it, this is how transient the church is. So we looked at a segment of givers from 2022 and followed them through to 2025. And what we found was pretty alarming. Largely those who gave in 22, 50% of them gave again in 2025. And you could think about this one or the other, half full or half empty. The average church lost half of their people over a 3-year time frame. So let that sink in for a second. And the most volatile or the most transient segment were the millennials and the Gen Z of your church. So just process that and let that sink in for a second.
And David, this is from our annual report that we did in late January, early February. And I think the thing that I talk to churches about often, church leaders, is the fact of this should be a story for why you have to continually be talking about what giving means to you and your church, because 50% of the people who are giving this year to your church don't know why they give or what your church believes about giving. And so continually having that conversation with people, because if every 3-4 years you're churning over 50% of your people, you've got a lot of people who have no clue why giving is important at your church. They're living off of what someone else has taught about giving. They're not living off of what you believe about giving.
Yeah, people give to vision. I
Yep.
encourage every church to have a case for support. If you've ever done a capital campaign brochure is akin to a case for support. Every nonprofit out there, every paraministry out there has a solid case for support. I think about Convoy. I think about Compassion. If you go to their websites, they unequivocally tell you that it takes $18 to feed a child. It takes, actually, I think it's like 45 now, inflation. It costs $28,000 to build a house in Ecuador. They have their data down, and they can tell you how those dollars are creating impact and ministry. And I would encourage you to look at some of those more popular paraministries and share and learn how they're sharing their vision and why they need your support to grow what they're trying to do. So that for a church context, that's going to be local, that's going to be global, it's going to be national. It's all those, it's all those things that you do, but that you don't necessarily put a spotlight on, that people are aware of.
Yep.
Here again, core givers are your best friends. This is the retention piece. And so in this particular case, we're 77% of them were retained. 11% started to drop. Less, I guess, very, very small percentile, 23 actually moved up into the band 5 category or top givers. But this is a graph or statistic you guys should be very aware of as it relates to better understanding those processes and how they translate to performance in the church. All right, let's talk about top givers. Top givers are your biggest fans, unequivocally. They love you. They're the most loyal. They love you and they want you to win in ministry, because these people are discipled, so they can see through the problems of day-to-day church struggles. Whereas maybe a first-time giver, hey, is it just about the money or is it about my journey? They sometimes don't have that clarified in their own mind. But the top givers, unequivocally, they get it. They want to see the local church. They know it's God's ordained strategy to reach a hurting world. And so they give with passion and cause. They also want to see, like what I said, the ROI. How does my return on investment create this support or advance the work that we're doing at the church. And some would say this is ROD, or return on discipleship. So you can also put it through that lens. Some key metrics that should be on every dashboard is, are we growing the number of top givers year over year? Are we increasing their giving? Example, how many of them are increasing versus decreasing? Retention, unequivocally, this should be north of 80, 85%. Like I said, they're your biggest fans. And then last, are they high income earners or wealth givers? And that's where some of the demographic data will start to expand on the potential to grow generosity.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's always been interesting to me. And when I was leading in the church, we had people who were in this category who were not the high income earners, but they were the people who were above and beyond givers. And so there's those categories as well, which those are the people who you really, you've got some top givers who are actually tippers, and you have others who are well above and beyond. And so understanding each of their individual stories is important in this conversation, and not taking them for granted in the journey, because each of them have a story, and they're actually some of your best people to call others to follow their example.
Yep. Again, not to be too redundant, but you'll see as you move up into that top giver category, the retention organically goes up. They're less transient, that sort of thing. And so the word of encouragement is start to lean into the demographic pieces. Again, the vast majority of church databases, they're missing so much information about your people, things like age, contact information, addresses. You have to, as a group, as a capital C church, have to get more intentional with understanding the age as well as contact information. Again, database hygiene is critical, because as we start to segment communication to this group, it becomes very important. And why I say that is, if you think about Gen Z and millennials, it takes a lot more of them to make up one boomer. And so as we start to understand giving from that 55 plus group, that is largely where the church has the greatest opportunity to advance generosity or giving. That statistic is accurate. 3.4 millennials or 10 Gen Zers to make up one boomer. So if you're churning your boomers because the music's too loud, I've heard that, ironically, you should be aware of that. Maybe you need to minister to them to say, hey, it's not always about you. It's about the next generation. So have some patience and grace. Wealth holders, this again, as we think about older givers that have stewarded well, that perhaps the greatest opportunity to grow generosity, this is that group. This is also a technical discussion and requires education. This group usually is well discipled, but they lack the education on how to do it or how to give from stored wealth. This is a journey that I personally have taken in the last few years. And so I realize, as much as I had the intellectual knowledge, I wasn't doing it. And then I challenged myself to make that step. And if you look at my annual giving in my church, again, I go to a small church called Life Church in Reno, Nevada. It exponentially increased because of how I was able to really think through my taxes and my stored wealth as I started thinking about my giving.
So David, I think the other thing in here is the fact of, as people age and they move into a fixed income world, that's part of that mindset shift here as well, is because all of a sudden, they've saved all that money up and now they're going to start drawing it. But all we've ever talked about, the church has ever talked about, is cash flow giving, not asset-based giving. And so even beginning to normalize some of that conversation is important here as well, because hey, I've already tithed on that money, or whatever the case may be, is one of the things I've heard people say. And so helping them understand some of the mindset shift of, all that you have is God's. So the question is not about what are you going to use it for? It's the question is, what is God going to use it for? So that's part of that mindset shift that has to be taking place as well.
Yeah. So think about this from a practical standpoint. Assets in cash, less than 10% of people's wealth is in their checking account. Just think about that from your own perspective. What do you have in your checking account versus what do you have in your 401k or your investment accounts or your real estate holdings, et cetera. And so that's really important step. Card processing. Um, when you see large card gifts come in, they're very expensive and highly inefficient to process. You're looking at 3+% for some of these reward cards. And it's great that people get miles, but it's very expensive gift to transact. And more importantly, this is what I really want you to think through, the missed opportunity to think about their wealth versus building credit card reward points is really what we want to have a conversation with. And so if we can transition from, yeah, I can get, 50,000 reward miles. I'm like, what a cool thing. But the reality is you're going to charge the church $1,500 to process that gift. And so that's the bigger piece of that. The giver journey, when we think about this older demographic, this is perhaps a different way to think through this. It's a departure from what you've been taught on how to help people to give from wealth. As you think about large, again, card gifts, don't miss the opportunity to redirect that and educate on how to give differently. There is a journey that we want people to take that are 60 and 70 years old, and it starts with a deferred gift. Of course, churches don't do wills and trusts very effectively. They don't publicly make their way into the vast majority of their people's estate planning documents. The reason is they want that current gift, but the psychology of moving into a deferred gift is the opportunity then to talk about an outright gift or a tax smart gift or even a split interest gift. And so that journey starts to take a different flavor than, say, a low level first time giver. These are people that are well discipled, or they should be well discipled. They've accumulated some wealth and they should have their own specific strategy of how to deploy that. The two things that you'll struggle with for people as you start to engage with them on this journey is going to be contentment and security. And if you think about both those are both rooted in discipleship. So if you can start to get people thinking about, say, a deferred gift, again, that is usually reserved for family. But if you can get people thinking about that and they put you in those estate planning documents, that next step or the next conversation is, have you thought about giving appreciated stock? You bought Apple when it was $80 a share. Today it's 300, right? It's like, how do you avoid that capital gains tax on appreciated assets? The next step is, how do you use a donor advised fund to maybe leverage gift stacking? In other words, there's tax benefits to using multiple years. And again, as people move into fixed income or move away from that W-2 earnings, there becomes opportunities for them to maybe give 2 or 3 years so that they can itemize their deduction and then take a standard deduction on the opposite years or the other years. That last step is a split interest gift. If nobody knows about split interest gifts, you have to get familiar with them. Commonly, they're referred to as charitable gift annuities. For very wealthy people, they'd be charitable remainder trust. But these are all things that go into the planning process that really help add flexibility to generosity. It's the gift that gives something back. In other words, if I might give $100,000, but I retain some economic interest in it. So I get a charitable deduction. The church gets the underlying asset. When I die, it's extinguished. In other words, no more interest payments. And then I also get, life income until myself or my spouse were to pass away. So this is a very specific journey that we would love to coach you on, or at least start to engage with you as you start to assess and understand the age demographics of your church. How to do it: segmentation, devotional guide, education classes, drip campaigns. Those are all the tools that we can start to resource you with as you start to understand the opportunity as it relates to your church. All right. I know I was pushing up against the barrier. How did I do, Dwayne?
You did okay, David. So no, good job. And next month we talked a lot about a lot of different strategies. Next month that we're actually going to do a big conversation, which is about how do you prepare and leverage a lot of this in and put it into practice for a end of year giving strategy. And so the segmentation conversation, how to make the right ask, all those pieces are going to be part of that conversation next month. So sign up.
And that was kind of that right there, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
And so we'll walk through a bunch of that next month and go from there. So we've got some time for a Q&A. So like we said before, either put it into the chat or put it into the Q&A, and let's talk.
A lot of questions usually come in after webinars as you've had time to process it. So if that is an easier thing to do, feel free to email me. It's real easy, David at Mortarstone. And we can schedule some time to unpack some of these slides or strategies as well.
Yep, and I put both David and I's email in earlier into the chat, and I'll do it again just so everyone has it easily available.
Thank you all for being customers, for showing up on this hump day, Wednesday in August. So hope everyone's staying cool and enjoyed their summer as well.
David, we just had somebody put in the Q&A, are there specific resources for engaging and educating millennials and Gen Z?
When you think about millennials and Gen Z, it's usually a capacity issue. And so they're struggling to acquire a home. I was thinking about just the average age of our first-time home buyer is over 40 years old. Think about that for a second. By the time I was 30, I had 2 homes and moved into three different homes. I think I was 28 or 29. And so I acquired my first home when I was 22. Moved when I was 25, got a rental property, moved again when I was 28. The barrier to getting out of student loan debt, saving for a house, is at tension with living generously towards the local church. And so understanding some of those age priorities is probably the nicest way to say that. They just don't have the capacity to give. If you look at wealth creation, they're here. We started here. So you can kind of graph that out as wealth exponentially grows. They do not have some of the same opportunities that Dwayne or I had as we were starting out. And so that is a tough segment. Do we have strategies? Yes. Tim Dietrich on our team leads our coaching and has developed lots of resources around teaching on this. So if you reach out to us, we can obviously get you some of the content we've created.
Yep, and I think as David said, the things that I've seen in the millennials and Gen Zs that I talk to is very much what David said, is they just need someone to walk with them and to start talking about it, because many of them have never experienced watching somebody actually give generously. And that's one of the challenges that I've seen with credit card giving and everything else, is it no longer is a family conversation. It just happens behind the scenes. So as David said, reach out to us. We can provide some resources to move forward with. And David, Shannon asked the question, the coaching offer for the giving journey, is that a consultant fee?
Again, what was that question?
The coaching offer for the giving journey. So we talked about the giving journey, and that you had said you'd love to sit down and talk to somebody. And
yes and no. We're happy to give you all the content we have. If you'd like to present it, then yes, there would be an associated fee with it. But we're happy to resource you with the content and the strategies free of charge. If you want us to come in and teach, or to start to interact with some of your givers, and we do that on a national basis, then there would be a fee associated with that. But as we develop resources, we want to be open-handed with them. So whatever you need, as you assess, we're happy to provide it for you.
Awesome. All right. If there's nothing else, we're just going to say have a great rest of August. We'll look forward to seeing you on, I think it's September 23rd for the end of year giving webinar. And once again, make sure you sign up for that. That's always a key moment, but I can tell you the strategies that we are going to talk about have been used by a lot of churches to impact and change the trajectory of their end of year giving. So come and listen. We can't wait to see you guys. So thank you all.